Episode 5 of the Show Me How podcast. I'm John Skuris, your host for today.
And I'm Stephanie Weber. Good afternoon.
Stephanie and I have been working together on this podcast for...
Ever.
It's feeling a little bit every, but we're on to our 5th episode with the podcast in this wonderful studio environment that we're in now. And we're going to come to you today with a nice topic about how to lease your first commercial space. And this is going to be a commercial topic on kind of the ins and outs of commercial leasing. And we'll go through a variety of topics. We're going to get into the lease types, lease structures, how to deal with business owners, what type of businesses there are, what kind of credit ratings there are, what kind of credited tenant structures there are, and little nuances of the commercial leasing world. So thank you for joining us. This will be a fun episode. And basically, we want to equip our listeners with the practical guidance, red flags, and real-world examples to help you guys go out and figure out if it's time for us to get a space. What do we need to do to prep for that space?
Right,
and
because
what do we need to do to
commercial
pay for it
is
too?
Definitely very different than residential.
Yeah.
So a note, too, is also make sure when you're working in commercial space to have a commercial broker helping you, because if you have a residential broker helping you, I can speak from my own experience. I have not a clue of commercial.
Yeah, it's a very different animal. It's nothing like a residential lease. I mean, there are some similarities in one version of a commercial lease, a gross lease.
Right.
So a gross lease is just basically where you pay for, only the space.
Right.
And then all the rest of the bills, the electrical, the water, utilities are mostly on you, although there's exceptions to that rule as well.
Right.
Yeah. So in commercial, it's very different. We have a variety of different lease types we'll go into now. And I have a tool for everybody that's going to be on the website available for you to download. Basically, it's a helpful chart that talks about each of these different lease types and when they're appropriate. But basically, we'll start with the gross lease. So the gross lease...
Before we go into the lease, just to kind of when you're looking at a space, how do you, some of the things that you talked to me about leasing isn't like renting an apartment, all that stuff, what you're looking for in a commercial space, whether it's a salon, a studio, growing garage, something of the lease types, red flags, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well... That's a great point. So you have to start out knowing what you want, right?
Right.
So what is it that you're looking for? So when you talk to a broker, you should know certain nuances like what ceiling height do you need, right? That's going to be important. Like in a studio environment, some of the spaces I lease are this is probably a 9-foot high ceiling. I have some that are 8, right? And they're a little bit tight. And if you have a dance studio coming in or some type of business where you want an open air environment and a lot of joviality with conversation, you might want a little higher ceiling space.
Right.
Because it'll get stuffy, it'll get crowded and loud. You also have to look, obviously, do you want a retail type space? Do you want to have space on a street that you walk up to? Or is that not as important to you? Like a studio environment, you really don't need that, right?
Right. We don't need to be on the
No. Art
street.
gallery, sometimes I like it. Sometimes it's part of an art community and you just want to be if you're an artist and you have an art studio, you don't mind just being in a space in the back.
Right.
But you may need very high ceilings, right? Also, what specialty things do you need? So is there some artists need kilns? Those are very difficult to find places for because very hot.
They're big,
and things like
right?
That. Yeah, or they're not that big. You get them smaller now, but the important thing is the heat and the exhaust and things like that.
Okay.
And restaurants too. I mean, if you're looking at a restaurant, you have to make sure that the place you're going to has what's called black iron, which refers way back to, it's basically gas pipe and exhaust setups.
Okay.
So that you can vent from the cooking, from the food, and make sure that you have all the sewage and water services that you need.
Okay.
Otherwise, that's, that could cost a minimum $125,000 nowadays to put that stuff in.
Wow.
And that's a big nut. So if you're going to go, it's always nice to be the second tenant at a restaurant location because you have the infrastructure in place and you don't have to have it built because
right.
you're going to be building a church for Easter, as some of my friends like to say.
Okay, so when we're looking at it, and you go, like you said, going through the different types of leases for commercial, and we'll have this chart up on our website too for you to look at. If you have any questions, you can reach out to John. But John, why don't you go through the different types of leases for commercial?
Yeah, I'll just name them real quick. The most popular, and this is in residential too, is the gross lease. Then you have a little more complicated lease, the modified gross lease. Then you have the kind of high credited tenant type lease, typically, although this can span the gamut depending on where you are. It's called a triple net lease. I'll go into details on that. Then there's two lesser used leases, a percentage lease and a ground lease. So we'll cover those at a high level. We won't spend too much time on those because they're not relevant.
Right.
So gross lease, again, very similar to residential lease. It's a single payment lease every month that covers all your expenses. So the landlord pays the taxes, landlord pays the common area maintenance, which is like sweeping and mopping and snow removal, things like that. And they pay for insurance as well. And landscaping could be under common area maintenance as well.
Okay.
Ideally, this is a simple lease. It's good for office and flex. It's a very simple lease. You really don't want all those details to come into play, and you don't want to negotiate your electrical and all that stuff in office lease. It doesn't really matter. Those aren't high costs.
So what if an office has like a lot of computers, a lot of high expensive equipment? Is the landlord still paying the insurance on that, or did the tenant have their own insurance?
Well, insurance for the structure is different than your own office and business continuity insurance. So you need to have your own insurance always. You should always do that.
So they're just insuring the structure.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you always want your own insurance, and you want a supplemental insurance even if the landlord does cover the structure. You don't know what their coverage is. They could have some ridiculously low amount of coverage. And we just had a situation where the gentleman's structure was worth, we estimated somewhere around $10 million, and he's at it for 30 years, and then he just lowered it to $5 million, and it burned down. So he's going to lose.
So he lost $5 million?
Roughly $3 to $5 million loss. But anyway, that's a little separate deal. It was all his business. But if you are tied in or expecting a return from your loss of your business, because if you're an art studio or something like that, or your art gallery, they know better. But just to give an example, your art burns, it's gone. Their coverage isn't going to cover it, and yours is hopefully your insurance is high enough that it covers the loss. That's why it's important to do assessments of the value of your business property, every 2 to 3 years, I'd say, or upon a big shift in your business model.
Okay. Good to know.
Make sure that you're covered, because the insurance for the building is only for the insurance. So the next type, which is one I work with a lot, is modified gross lease. So that's where the tenant pays a base rent, and then there's a additional rent component to it. So base rent is basically the rent per square foot for the rentable square feet. In commercial leasing, we divide a space by rentable square feet or usable square feet. Okay. Usable, obviously, is smaller. So if we had on a new building today, we'll just take that as a general structure.
Okay.
They usually budget about 15% of the building structure would be common area. Okay. Stairways, elevators, closets, mail rooms, things like that.
Right.
Hallways. And then the other 85% is actual usable square footage by the tenant.
Okay.
But you get charged for that. So if I have 1,000 square feet that I rent in an office or a commercial structure, I will have an adjustment of 1.15% in this scenario times the usable square feet. So 1.15 times 1,000 is 1,150 square feet. So my base rent is charged times that number, not the square footage.
Not just the square footage. Oh, good to know.
Yeah, so everybody shares the cost of that. So there's electrical in the hallways, there's gas, there's heat, right? There's carpeting, there's tile, there's water in the bathrooms, etc. There's electricity for the elevator. There's the elevator itself.
Okay.
You're paying for all that stuff. So, that's covered in the adjustable mortgage rent, or adjustable rate, which is what we call the additional rent.
Yeah.
They also add in there janitorial and, the maintenance of the building and things like that are also built into that as a common area maintenance fee for additional rent. So the base rent, you have a multiple of 1.15, 15% in the scenario I gave you. But then you're also charged additional rent on top of it.
Okay.
So for whatever the building's expenses are, the insurance, the common area maintenance, repairs, taxes, all that are in common area or additional rent and covered with a separate rental fee. So, for instance, if my base rent is $20 a square foot, I might have, if I'm not in the loop, I might have $10 a square foot in additional rent. So it's $30 a square feet. Then it's not times 1,000. It's not $30,000 a year. It's times 1,150.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
So you have to pay for that common area, those same fees for those common areas.
So is it similar to the HOAs for residential?
Well, not necessarily, because, yes, in some regards it is. There are similarities. But in this case, you are called out for your particular section. I guess it is the same, because I guess each tenant owner
is responsible
for their portion of those fees. Yeah.
The way they do it is a little obviously different.
Right.
Because they just charge you a flat HOA fee a month. But this one it's kind of similar in the sense.
Yeah, it is. And by the way, it adjusts too. And it sounds like it adjusts for HOAs too, which is your expertise. But depending on the inflation.
Right.
We usually put in a 3% escalation rate, but lately we've been using 5% because of the high inflation rates. So whatever your base rent is, there'll be an escalation on the base rent, and then there'll be a separate escalation, which is kind of an estimate for what your expenses will be on the additional rent, because nobody really knows, right? You're subject to whatever those bills are next year. In the case of Chicago, we use Commonwealth Edison, and they raise their rate, 12% or whatever. Well, they constantly raise it. You're going to have to make sure you are made whole at the end of the year. So we put an estimate out there of what you're going to be charged. We use 3%, but then in most cases they come back with the actuals. So we do it a year in reciprocal. So we'll look at right now, usually around March timeframe, April in the spring. We look at 2024 in this case, last year's cumulative expenses for the structure.
Okay.
All their repairs, all their insurance, all their utilities. We total it all up, then we divide it by the total square feet, and then we get the amount that everyone's going to be charged additional for the following year. So if it was $10 originally when you signed it, and let's say we have a great experience with a new administration, and all the fees get lowered. Let's say the electrical goes down, the gas goes down.
Where is this?
In America, 2025. And next year you end up looking at it, and our cumulative fees are only $8.50 a square foot. Well, you still have your $20 plus 3% escalation in the scenario I created. But in your additional rent, it would be down from $10 to $8.50 a square foot.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of a trick. And that's why it's more complicated. Your base rent's always going to go up because we presume inflation all the time.
Right.
Your utility costs are going to probably go up too, but in some cases they have gone down. I have seen them going down.
Okay. What are some of the biggest?
Oh wait, we have one more.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you got to get all of them here. So, and again, the modified gross is great for a shared building. And mid-size office users typically. So the buildings I'm leasing with modified gross are loft office, high ceilings. And that actually is interesting because loft office have huge hallways and huge ceilings. They don't measure the ceilings in these cases. It's all about the square footage on the ground. But it's 18 to 19% adjustment in those buildings. So
wow.
But they were loft office. They were built, 150 years ago. They weren't built for efficiency. Today, when you're building a structure, it's very precise. We want 12% common area or 15. So it's a little bit different world than it was back then. And then finally, the most common of the 5 leases is a triple net lease, where the tenant pays the rent and the property taxes and the common area maintenance costs and the insurance, and they may even hire all these people. So a good example of a business that uses that type of structure would be Walgreens.
Okay.
So Walgreens is a triple net lease customer. They may even be a land lease customer.
Okay.
So this comes into play in this case. The ground lease scenario could come into play. So basically, Walgreens just wants a location.
Right.
And they'll go in, they'll tear down, and they'll have a builder ready to go, and they'll build out this bit. They'll say, we want this corner, usually a corner, and we want it for 20 to 25 years. So good tenant to have, and they will cover everything. So you retain ownership of the land, they lease it from you, and they may even build their own building. Now, in some cases, there's different scenarios where different businesses will want you to build or spend some of the money to build the structure.
Right.
Or you'll give a tenant improvement allowance in this case, which will be significant. If you're building a $5 million structure, they may want $1 million back from you for the 20-year lease, and then you help them finance the building of the structure.
Okay.
But essentially, they pay for their own janitors, they being Walgreens or the commercial entity that rents this way. They have property managers, obviously, in a region like Chicago that take care of all their Walgreens. They have vendors that come out and do snow removal. They have security vendors. All those things are covered by that particular entity.
Okay.
So it's very nice for landlords because it's hands off. You'll see a lot of family.
Yeah, you're just basically giving them the land.
Yeah, in the family offices, families that have lots of money and own lots of real estate, they have offices where they concentrate their investments, and it's called a family office. And a lot of those types of organizations like to have triple net lease properties.
Right.
So you'll see them advertised. It'll be a gas station, could be triple net, Culver's, any Olive Garden. And some are regional, some are local. We'll get into that a little bit more when I talk about the different type of tenants.
Okay.
So another thing to consider, the percentage lease. So basically, it's base rent plus a percentage of your gross sales. So if you're a restaurant, sometimes restaurants will go into that. That's a slippery slope, though, and a lot of landlords don't like to get into business with other people and take those risks. But some do, and it depends on the structure and what kind of environment, business environment it is at the time. It's great for retail tenants who have variable seasonal revenue in some cases.
Okay.
So it works out good for them. And then the ground lease, basically, tenant builds the landlord's land, but doesn't own it. So we talked about it. Franchise model, institutional type tenants like Walgreens would be ideal for that situation.
Okay.
All right. With the first three leases, ground lease, the gross lease, modified gross lease, and the triple net lease, they're typically 3 to 5 year leases.
Right.
But it really depends on what the business plans are, and are you expanding from one business to several or something like that. But typical is 3 years. Escalation clauses are usually tied. I like to tie them to the consumer price index, especially over the last few years because the inflation rate was not accurate. It was very off, and it can be tampered with, and the consumer price index is very specific. Right. So it drills into a very precise segment of the market. So you could look at, wood, what the inflation rate for wood and business materials would be, or you could look at restaurants, what their consumer price index has been, and therefore will apply that specific escalation to your business because it's very precise. Okay. So it can be done a variety of different ways. I like that, especially over the past few years. I think moving forward, we'll be in a more stable economic environment, and you could use more of a fixed percentage, which is a lot easier to deal with, frankly. But if you're off significantly on that escalation, you could lose tens of thousands or more dollars depending on the structure. So it's very important to pick the right model at the right time. Right. And understand from a tenant perspective what model is being used because you can get hit very hard as well. So,
and that leads us to our what's the biggest clause most people miss and end up costing them later?
So there's a variety of clauses. I think that the biggest clause could be, there's not one big one, I would say. There are several different ones that could be tricky. The term of the lease is number one. You got to look at that and make sure that you're paying attention to that. And that's a clause, believe it or not, it's very important. But your move out clause as well. Why I bring that one up is I just had experience with it where there's a customer of mine who had a building and the whole thing's for sale, but he's leasing a portion of the property. And we got he had an existing tenant in there, and I was talking to a customer who wanted to buy out the whole property for, somewhere around $4 million. And I asked him about the lease of this existing tenant, and I wanted to renew it, but he didn't want to pay the fee to me to renew it. And I warned him. I said, well, could end up costing a lot of money, but he insisted. Went on, did it, and ended up that he did not put a move-out clause in.
And explain what a move-out clause is.
Well, move-out clause, in this case, there's a potential that the building would be demolished. So you want to have a move-out clause in the event that you sell the building. And in exchange for that move-out clause, you give them a break. Or you pay for their relocation fees and a fee.
Okay.
So there's a way to make the tenant whole, but those are tricky little things. And if you don't look for them, some unscrupulous brokers and owners will try and slip those by you. They're hoping they'll sell it. I've seen landlords that have their property for sale for 15 years, 10 years. It's ridiculous.
Because they have leases they can't get out of.
No, they just don't. They just provide the property for an unrealistic rate out in the market. But someday it might catch up to them and it'll be worth selling.
Right.
And then if you have a move-out clause, you didn't notice it, all of a sudden your business gets relocated. And you don't get any fees on it either. So, that's the big one I've seen that could be really damaging. And you really don't want to get caught with that.
And then how can you tell when the lease favors the landlord too much?
Well, I don't like, long leases are tricky leases, right? So the longer they are, the more some lawyer has got his fingers into them typically. So you got to look out for the little nuances there. Now with, I'll say something we haven't talked about adding into this discussion, which I think is a real benefit to you, our audience today, is artificial intelligence. So nowadays, what I would do is I would scan a lease. I scan them myself and read them for my customers. Okay. But now I could use artificial intelligence to scan that and find those clauses.
Wow, so that's a great thing.
Yeah, now it's not impermeable, and you have to watch out because artificial intelligence isn't 100% accurate. But it can definitely speed things up because some of these leases you get into are 20, 30 pages.
Right, especially in commercial.
Yeah, paying a lawyer, that fee to go through these things. And not to mention the fact that if you look at in my experience, looking at these commercial leases out there that are written 30, 40, 50 years ago, they are painfully terrible. They're just terrible. They're poorly written. They're not updated. They're not relevant anymore. And they're way too long. Okay. So they're arduous. So, making sure that you review those clauses is critical. Review them for all the information they need and, try and, just protect yourself from getting those uncertain. Your broker should help you review that, but it's not the broker's responsibility. Just to be clear, it's your responsibility and your lawyer's responsibility to review those leases. Okay. The broker can help you, but they're not legally responsible. So what are some of the clauses that you'd like to highlight for the commercial space that people should really hone in on? Well, again, the early move-out clause is one that's a critical one. If for any reason they want to do something to the building, you're at their whim, and that may be okay. You may be ready for an upgrade after 3 years, right? You may want to move. You may be right. You think you're going to grow out of the business, but you have to craft it in a way that's going to mean something to you, to protect you, and actually maybe even help you. Okay. If you have the idea to move, and in 3 years they're looking to do something with the structure. Also, operating expenses and pass-throughs. This is, again, with these old leases I was talking about a minute ago. Right. In some cases, those leases are to your favor because the landlord isn't a well-vetted landlord. They aren't experienced. They haven't read their lease in 20 years. I just had a situation where a customer owned a theater and they hadn't updated the lease in 27 years. And when the tenant wanted to leave, they left, and there was no move out. There was no penalty at all. And it was $60,000 a month.
Wow.
And they picked up and left. So, reading these things and looking for the move out clause and the operating expense pass-throughs.
So the landlord had nothing. Could do nothing.
They couldn't do anything because the lease was written poorly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, again, looking for those, looking what the operating expenses are. Are you paying for the common area maintenance? Make sure you got a good split. That math is not easy to do. I'll just say that right now.
Yeah.
I've done it many times, and I did it wrong many times initially when I was starting out. It's hard to calculate. So make sure your broker knows what they're talking about, or get it double checked by somebody who does, because there could be significant mistakes. And you're paying $2-3 a month per square foot in error because of a mistake. So you don't want that to happen.
No, not at all.
Relocation clause, it's similar to the early move out clause. You got to make sure if you are going to be moved out, what that relocation is going to be. Also, there's potential for relocation if there were damage to the structure. If there were a fire or something like that, you'd want to make sure that you have a relocation clause built in there in the event it's not your fault.
Right.
It's the landlord's fault, and there's other coverages for that and insurance and things, but it's not a bad idea to have it in your lease. Assignment and sublet restrictions. So that's a little tricky because commercial leases are different. I'm not going to want any Joe Blow business over here to move in from where you leased necessarily without doing a background check.
Right.
So as a broker for my customers, I would require that we have to approve those persons. You have to make sure they go through a credit check. They might have to put down a higher security deposit. It's all subject to their financial model, how long they've been in business, what their revenues are. So you can ask for a sublet, and you should, but check into those restrictions, but understand they need to be reasonable for the landlord too.
Right.
Okay. And then having no cap on the common area maintenance or administration fees can be a big one. That's more for larger, bloated operating businesses, but look out for it anywhere, because if administration fees are in the common area maintenance or the additional rent,
right,
there's no cap on those. Whereas gas and electric and things like that, they'll have a cap because it's directly billed from the entity that's providing that service.
Right.
Admin fees are not like that, so you have to watch out for those.
Right. God, there's so much to digest when looking at a commercial space. And like you said, looking through this, maybe it'd be helpful to give some real life case study experience of, things that went south and how to prevent that.
Well, I mean, the biggest one that I could go back to is the one in the office location where the doctor's office is in the first floor, and a potential buyer came, and it was restrictive, and we lost the buyer as a result. So a $4 million loss potentially. And, potentially that tenant could have moved, but you now have to ask them because you didn't have the proper clause put in place.
Right.
And so they may not want to go. And if they don't want to go, in this case they didn't, you don't get to sell your property unless the
buyer wants to honor the lease.
But in this case, that wasn't going to happen. So, you really got to watch out. That was over $100,000 mistake. It was a multi-million-dollar mistake. But if that person had agreed to move, it probably would have been a $100,000 move fee.
So,
right?
You got
to marketing costs. You have to educate all the people from the business that their location's moved. There could be other expenses as well. Certainly the moving fees of the equipment alone. Right?
Wow.
Could be tenant improvement allowance that you pay for. So there's a lot of hidden fees that if you don't walk it through and look carefully could nip you in the bud. So
there's some really key clauses that you need to read and negotiate before signing. What are some clauses you never overlook again? Well, almost, again, it depends on the lease type. So a gross lease, there's not much. Modified gross lease, there's things to be
concerned about, and this is really where they get tricky. Common area maintenance, again, review the definitions of what common area maintenance is in their definitions and what calculation methods they're using to make sure they're accurate. Also, in the commercial space, HVAC, that could fall completely upon you if you don't have it built properly into the lease. So you want to make sure that there's a clause regarding who is responsible for the HVAC, who's required if it fails, who's required to pay for it, and who's taking care of the filters. So actually, there's a scenario that you put me in with a dog grooming business. Mm-hmm. And one of the big things that popped up was, dog hair is flying all over the place.
Right.
And so one of the clauses was that they had to clean all the filters. Now, they were used to this because, the hair is flying all over, but I had never thought of it. It was very interesting.
That is very interesting.
Right. So in the case of a regular business, it's no big deal on who does the filters. Probably done once a year or something like that, maybe twice a year. But something to look out for. Signage is critical, right?
Right.
So if you're in a building downtown, there's restrictions, or if you're in a building on a pedestrian street as it's designated, some of them like Milwaukee Avenue in Chicago is a pedestrian street, so you can't have any driveways going onto it. But also they have very restricted requirements regarding signage. So signage is important. If it's important to your business, you need to know about where you're going. It's another thing about profiling a particular property.
Correct.
Where are we going? Do I want a sign sticking out, a tent sign they call it, coming out from the wall? Is a glass window etching fine?
Right.
So that if that's important to you, make sure you look through it and make sure it's a part of the lease.
Okay.
What else? Escalation clauses. These are the ones we talked about before. In the scenario I gave you, we use 3% and 3% escalation for additional rent, 3% for base rent. But, we did 3% escalation last year and 5% for additional rent because of the high inflation.
Right.
So it just depends on the current circumstances. Today, I'd say 3 and 3 is fine. But, you have to look out and make sure somebody's not trying to pass 5 and 5 or something along those lines. Renewal option. Obviously, if your business is thriving and all of a sudden you don't have a first right of refusal,
right,
or a renewal option, now you have a real problem, right?
Right.
And if you don't get along with the landlord for some reason, or the landlord decides they want to take back the business, or they have a bigger tenant that they want to give it to.
Right.
Those are real concerns. So you really need to ask about the renewal options.
That, just before we go on, just like something you said, I know we talked about as a tenant, but how do you really evaluate if the landlord's a good fit? Like you're in a building, do you look for like long-term tenants? What do you look for as far as a landlord being a good fit?
Long-term tenant's a great one. And what should you do besides just determine there's a long-term tenant? Talk to that tenant.
Okay.
Find out what their experience has been with the landlord and get some history there if you can. Look at the structure. How do they take care of it? What maintenance do they use? Is it spick and span? One of my customers is just meticulous about his property. He takes great care of it. And when you walk up, you can tell. You just know this place is well groomed. It's well taken care of. All the mechanicals are fixed immediately if they're broken down. That's important. Business continuity is a serious thing. If what do we have? The coldest day in 25 years this winter?
Yeah.
I had a broken pipe in one of my properties and I got it fixed almost immediately. I was very fortunate, but if you're not on it and your landlord's not on it, you could be out of business for a couple of days at least.
Right.
Or it gets worse because it kept getting colder and colder. So as that water's pouring in, if somebody doesn't get out there right away and doesn't mitigate it, that's a real problem.
It could be an ice skating rink.
So if you don't have a landlord that's on site potentially or has a building manager on site, that's kind of a red flag that you'd be concerned about, because if they're having a problem at one building, they could have them at 3, and when are they going to get to yours? So something to think about, something to ask about.
Absolutely. And then what about personal guarantees versus security deposit?
Well, so that's all related to a couple things. One, first of all, the tenant improvement allowance, the build out that you're going to require for the structure. So if you need a relatively expensive build out, let's say $50,000 on a small commercial place, it doesn't sound like a lot, but if the rent's only $50,000 and the build out's $50,000, well, that's on a 5-year lease, that's 20% of the value. So now, how much is the tenant going to pay for? How much is the landlord going to pay for? There's situations where the build out is $1 million or more.
Right.
So in order to secure that, the landlord's going to require a couple things. It could be just a escrow account where you put your funds aside, and they'll use that as a drawdown to pay the rent.
Okay.
So if you have a 5-year term and you have a 6-month rent abatement, I'd say usually get 1 month per year abatement of rent. So 5 months of abatement. And then you have this build out, which will be $1 million. And now you want to recoup that. For the first 5 months, the landlord has put out, a portion of that. Let's say they've put out $600,000.
Okay.
Right? Now they're not getting paid rent for 5 months, and
Right.
they put out $600,000. They're taking a lot of risk. So a landlord will what I would suggest to a landlord would be that you ask for a escrow and, or better yet, a CD put into escrow, where the CD is earning interest. So you are benefiting as the tenant from that interest. It's not going to be a whole lot over 5 months, but actually that scenario will probably run. A personal guarantee, I'd say, would go about 18 months.
Okay.
Because you're putting in $600,000, so you have an 18-month drawdown period, and you'll put maybe $50,000 per month. So $800,000 into this account, and you'll draw down your rent from that starting in the 6th month, going forward for 18 months. So you have your pure free no rent for 5 months, and
Right.
then the landlord is paying their rent out of this escrow, but they're also earning interest on it. So the landlord has that money secured. It's in escrow. Nobody could take it out without a signature. And so their $600,000 investment in the property is secured. So that usually works out for everybody. But, it's a big nut to come out with. If you have a big build out, usually it's a bigger organization and they have a lot of money.
Right.
So for the smaller guy, we're not talking about those numbers, right? We're talking about 20,000 or something like that.
Right.
But you still may be asked to put it in escrow, and they may draw down, $3,000 a month,
Right.
over a 6-month period to get to their $18,000 back, right? So it's just relative to the size of the business and the type of business you're in.
Another thing that I think people don't really understand, and probably you can expand on this, is zoning, business licenses, what's required, not just insurance, like looking before you go at a space and understanding, like you said, the dog groomer business, which is great, or dog sitter business, but in that residential area, is that allowed?
Yeah, good point. So business licensing is, the responsibility of the business owner and operator. So before you go looking for a property, it's your responsibility to check with the city and find out, one, is that license just going to be issued, or is it going to be, need to be approved?
Right.
Those are two different things, obviously. And approval means that you better get that approval before you start looking for it, signing a lease, looking for a property and signing a lease, because you're going to be signed into an agreement and then you don't get approval. That's obviously a problem. But even if you can get a business license, the location where your business goes into effect or you want to operate it could be impacted by the zoning rules and regulations. Right. And that's the responsibility of the business owner to figure that out with a zoning attorney or zoning assistance from the city of Chicago, which will then also push you to a zoning attorney. So you got to make sure that where you're going, you articulate to your broker that we need, B12 zoning or
Right.
B13 zoning.
Right.
Why? Well, it's this particular type of business, and therefore we require that type of zoning in this particular area.
Exactly.
Now, if it's a good broker, they'll know about this stuff. They may be able to find other opportunities for you in different zoning areas, and then you could expand your search, which will make it a little easier. You may find better rates, but it's critical that you find out, not only what structure, what's the layout going to be, what parking requirements are you going to need, what delivery requirements are you going to have, is there ADA access, things like that. Mm-hmm. But you'll also want to find out the zoning to make sure that you have the right property in mind. Okay. You don't want to sign a lease and not be able to open your business, obviously.
I think a lot of people have different expectations based on the landlord, the lease, the tenant's leverage. What leverage do you really need to have as a first-time commercial business space?
Leverage is money, right?
Right.
Experience. So what I look for and what I'd want to see are your 3 years of your business reports, your P&I or P&L, pardon me, and you're going to want to see how long they've been in business, do they have multiple locations, etc. You're going to want to see how much income they have and how steady they are. So those are all good things for you, and that'll, you're going to be competing out in the marketplace. So it's just like competing for an apartment. Who has the better credit,
Right.
who has the better long-term experience, how many landlord referrals can you get? Similar kind of components come into play in this.
And then how does a lease impact what I can negotiate? Like, if I'm the first-time tenant, first-time commercial leaser.
Well, you could negotiate anything. I mean, do you have a specific question in mind?
Just looking at it from the aspect of, if I never had this business before.
Yeah.
Right. I'm new. I have an idea.
Okay. I'll tell you about the different types of tenants. This will
Right.
maybe give you an idea. All right. So there's the way we look at tenants is by credit profiling. So there's something called nationally credited tenant, regionally credited tenant, and a locally credited tenant, and non-credited tenants. So that would be your typical business. So,
Right.
I mean, that's what we're essentially talking about today for most of our audience. They're not going to have a credit rating with Finch or S&P or anything like that. So you're just going to have to go with kind of the documentation I provided. But what that gives you is, if you have some of those components, which I'll get into in a little bit, you'll have negotiation capability and pressure you can apply to the base rent,
Okay.
to the terms of the base rent, to the tenant improvement allowance, to the abatement period. All that will be impacted by what type of client you are. And some of the tenant profiles are, again, there's three big key ones. The national credit tenant is a typical, like a chain business, franchise, investment-backed tenants, high leverage businesses. They get best terms on tenant improvement allowance, and again, lower escalation and free rent abatement. Right. Then you go into your regional credited tenant. This is a multi-location business. I think the best one for us to think about in the Midwest is Culver's.
That's what I was going to say.
Right, because it was only in Wisconsin.
Right.
Like 5 years ago, 7 years ago maybe. And then boom, it expanded everywhere. I think it's probably all over the nation at this point. But or Potbelly. Remember Potbelly? It was one location over on Lincoln Avenue. And then it was three.
Right.
And then it was all of a sudden at Midway. I was like, yes, when I fly out of Midway, I could get Potbelly. And now it's a nationwide, but it was a regionally credited tenant for a long time.
Right.
And again, they have less pressure they can apply on the base rent and those other tools and components, but they have some more than the average small business.
Okay.
And then the locally credited tenants. So that's your lowest leverage case. You'll get asked for larger deposits, shorter term rents, and bigger guarantees.
Okay. So is there any new add-ons or different terms of the lease that people can look for, and how it impacts what the landlord offers, the short-term lease? Why is that good?
Well, I mean, yeah, all these things are important to you, right? It depends on your business model and what you're trying to achieve. But tenant improvement allowance, you're going to get more tenant improvement allowance with the longer-term lease.
Okay.
So, I typically do, if there's a 5-year lease, I'll do like 15 to 17%
Okay.
of the tenant improvement allowance. So if there's $100,000 build out you're going to need to pay, we'll pay $15,000 of that to $17,000 of that for a 5-year term.
Right.
So but different structures do different things. It depends on the landlord. That's what I do on average. Short-term leases, well, there's less leverage and therefore more risk for the tenant. You could be displaced quicker, and that causes expense. Also disassociate you with your local presence if that's important to you. So those aren't great. You want longer term if you can get it. Retail wants longer term. Flex and tech and office space could live with shorter term.
Right.
It's not as important for you. Institutional landlords versus mom and pop property owners. Well, institutional is going to be less flexible, right?
Yeah.
They're going to have their figures and they're going to be like, this is what we want. And you know why? It's because they're like a corporation. They operate by the quarter and by the year, and their managers are beholden to the corporate officers. And they say there's a projection that we're going to have 3% increase in rents this year. They're going to have to stick to it. Mom and pop are way more flexible, right? They're like, oh,
Right.
Stephanie, you're so nice.
You want to start?
Your daughter's so cute. Oh, we'll do it for half the rent.
Yeah.
And you will get this because there's some people that own, I met a guy the other day who owns 20 mixed-use buildings.
Yeah.
He's rich beyond his wildest needs, and he will cut people a break. Just because he wants a coffee shop in his building, he'll charge half the rent.
Right. And I think that, when you're a new commercial lease person or business, I would say go to a mom and pop if you can, because I know my parents, when they had, their place on Halsted Street, my mom and dad, if anyone had a sob story, they would fall for it, so.
Well, slow down.
Yeah, I'm just saying, instead of like they would listen to them versus, it's numbers.
Yeah. Well, that's true. But at the same time, if you need your business operating, the mom and pop is going to be less able to handle those needs quickly.
Right.
So there's the benefit there too. So if you're a professional business, you want to operate efficiently. If there's any storm damage or broken pipes or down HVAC, those are not small bills. Mom and pop may not be able to break out the $30,000. And then I've seen situations where tenants actually have to pay to get their HVAC fixed because the landlord doesn't have the money.
Right.
So, again, it all depends on your situation, and it's hard to find those mom and pops. But
so when we're dealing with all this, what are some negotiation tips that you could give to our listeners?
Well, always ask for tenant improvement. Always ask for everything. It's my motto.
Ask for the world.
Ask for everything. Ask for a lower rent. Ask for tenant improvement. Ask for rent abatement. Ask to, whatever you can get.
Right.
Because if you don't ask, you will not get. That's the one thing for sure.
That's a great way to look at it. Yeah. And then
secure rent abatement, during a build out would be something I'd be asking for too.
Right.
You don't want to be paying rent when you're having the build out done. That's a pretty reasonable request.
Okay.
So I go with that. And then you want escape clauses. If your business, God forbid, goes belly up or you struggle or something in the economy breaks in your particular business segment or the whole economy like it did back in 2020.
Yeah.
You don't want to be caught in there. Now, in 2020, the COVID years, a lot of landlords had no choice. They had to work with the tenants in that case.
Right.
But you should be looking out for those things because they do happen.
And then
some markets get hit extremely
just thinking
hard.
about that 2020, everyone see it, you're indemnified or whatever clause or, clause that you have in there. What should you, I know we don't plan on having another pandemic, but learning from that, like in a lease for a commercial space, if the government shuts you down, what should you put in your clause to protect yourself?
Well, that's a difficult thing to mitigate against.
Right.
Basically, there's clauses for acts of God.
Right.
Storms, government, and usually there's a clause in there that's addresses that for you.
Right.
I can't remember the term now. But there are clauses that are built into these leases to prevent those types of things
Right.
from happening. So make sure there is one, an act of God type clause.
Or act of government or something.
Yeah, they're all under the same term.
Right.
Yeah.
Just something to mention as we lived through 2020. It was so much fun. Just some takeaways, kind of looking at different things, scenarios that you said, the retail tenant that required $300,000 build out, different requests that landlords and tenants make and how to handle them.
Well, again, it's all subjective to the particular one, but
Right.
if you have a big tenant improvement allowance and you have a big deposit you have to put down, you ask for a CD. So at least while your money's out of the market, it's earning some interest.
Right.
So nowadays you get 4.5%. So if you have an 18-month to 2-year period of time for $300,000 to be in a CD, at least you're getting 4.5% on it. So, and it's drawing down on your lease, and interest is being paid towards your rent. So I'd say that's one of the big things I'd look for.
Things. Then I guess the biggest, probably listener submitted, what happened if the business fails? Can I walk away from the lease?
Well, again, a good thing to have in your clause is a business escape clause that I mentioned earlier. So what happens in that case? Now, a lot of landlords just want to cut and run. They don't want to tie up the space.
Right.
Because you could get litigious. And I guess what I would say is, just go to your landlord and have a discussion about it and say, hey, look, don't wait until the last minute
when you have no more
when there's
items in the store.
Yeah, and there's no leverage with the landlord. Give the landlord some time to plan for this. Although that could lead to them saying, look, we'll let you out, but we have another tenant, you have to go.
Yeah.
So that's a realistic situation you're going to have to deal with. But just talk, communicate.
Right.
The landlords I work with and the tenants I work with, they've all been good people 90%, 99% of the time. Nobody wants anybody to fail. And what I do is I try and bring my landlords, tenants that I see look like they're going to be successful. I have a situation now where I'm not so sure. And so I'm kind of backing off bringing this lease to my landlord. He has it, but we're not really pressing it because we both kind of have this feeling it might not be a right thing, right?
Right. So either gut feeling.
Not gut. I know it based on financials,
But when I say gut feeling, everyone has a gut feeling like, I don't know if this is a good idea.
Yeah,
like,
gut's important.
Yeah.
Back it up with data. I'm a data dog.
Of course, you're data. But if you get that queasy feeling in your stomach and things keep you keep running into doors, maybe that isn't the best idea.
Use your gut instincts. Talk to the landlord.
Okay.
Try and prepare a clause. Be realistic. Communicate often, frequently, and clearly. So that you don't overdo it, of course. If there's nothing, if you have your little worries at home in your office, and it's not going to come to fruition, don't talk about it. Only when you get pressured would I start going to the landlord to kind of give them some information if you really get nervous. But you can do it. You'll win. So don't worry about those exit clauses.
So, I know we're going to further dive into this in future episodes with a commercial attorney, but what would some of your key takeaways be for our new business owners? Obviously, you could always reach out to John. He's great with numbers. He likes numbers. He inundates you with numbers.
I write leases, commercial leases.
And he goes over and back, over and back, over and back. So what are some of your takeaways?
The only person that doesn't like details?
No, I don't.
Assignment clauses, subletting, and personal guarantees are going to be some of the key things that we have to go over. But, all these clauses that we talked about, and these different types of leases and the different types of scenarios for your business. It's really relative to each person's business, their location, the current economy. There's so many different relative factors.
Right.
You just need a good broker who can look at these things in this moment in time and figure out what's going to be the red flags or the important items for you.
Correct.
And make sure that those are included in your lease.
So I think the key takeaway is the lease doesn't just protect the landlord. It should also be protecting you. So it should be a win-win where everyone walks away understanding the terms, feeling good about it. You don't want to open your business thinking your landlord's out to get you. So I think that's a really important part of it. And as we go through this, and have more people on talking about commercial, and we want to make it simple for our listeners, to understand it. John's going to post his charts. He likes charts, so he's going to post all his charts on our website for you, so you can understand.
Chart. So you got to understand those. Number one, and I'll give you 5 questions to ask before you sign a commercial lease.
Okay.
Just call me. I'll help you walk you through it. But if you don't have those, at least you have those 5 questions. So what are we doing next, Stephanie?
Oh, well, we're going to talk about condo boards and HOAs. Those are exciting new type of.
Well,
Yay.
it's also very clause specific. Actually, it's very similar to a lease.
Right. We're kind of staying on the same theme, and we know that we had Riley in, and she just bought her condo, and God love my daughter. She didn't read her
Condo
HOA
deck.
or her condo thing, and you can't move furniture up the front stairs.
Oh yeah.
There's like a $700 fine. No,
So how much?
$700.
What?
Yes, but she didn't get the fine because there was a little mix up in getting her the bylaws. But
not a fan of
she
condo
recently just
associations.
had appliances delivered, and they had to go up the back stairs.
Well, that's fine. Of course they should.
Right.
I don't want I have my tenants bringing stuff up my front stairway. I'm like, what are you doing? I wish I had had a $700 clause. I'm going to add that back in.
So we will be talking about that, and we will see you guys next time.
Yeah.
If you have any questions about this segment, it's a lot. We know that. We want to lay the foundation. John's going to go through it more. Like you said, the dog, grooming, boarding business, that's huge.
Well, and Matt that owns Sonic Palace here.
Right, we
the
love
studio
Matt.
we're in. He's looking to lease a new place, but he just found a commercial place that he might be able to buy, and he'll end up.
And John's going to help him
half
figure
the
that
rent
out.
and renting out the rest of the place.
Sonic Palace is a big sponsor of the Show Me How podcast.
That's right. They are.
We love Sonic Palace.
Great studio.
So we will be back in, and there's all ways around things. Don't get discouraged, and we're here to help you. So
we are.
Look for all those charts that John's going to load up on the podcast on the website. It will be super exciting, very exciting. Maybe I'll put emojis by them, like.
But again, we're just trying to give you the general here on the podcast. Specifics always are relative to your specific situation, but we're happy to talk you through it. Go on the website, find the tool, and thank you very much for tuning in. And
we'll see you next time.